Crystal River 位于美国佛罗里达的西海岸，是佛罗里达海牛的重要栖息地。这是我时隔7年后再次到访，上一次是在16年的2月，那是一个同样晴空万里的早晨，我们划着 kayak 去3姐妹泉寻找海牛。浮潜时，海牛和我擦身而过，那是我与海牛一期一会的邂逅。这次专门为了采访与海牛有着50年交往的 Powell 博士，并且我再一次下水去见了这些憨憨的老朋友。佛罗里达海牛是一种大型海洋哺乳动物，它们非常温顺和友善。它们通常栖息在温暖的海湾和河流中，以水草、海草为食。在过去许多年的捕杀和栖息地丧失的威胁下，佛罗里达海牛曾经面临灭绝的威胁，但是在过去几十年中，人们采取了许多保护措施，使它们的数量逐渐恢复，而水晶河就成为了它们非常重要的栖息地。
It's really a pleasure that I'm going out with Buddy today to the Three Sisters Spring in Florida, and we see manatees here, and this is a very important manatee sanctuary area. And I would like to have Buddy to introduce a little bit of this area and how it is important to Florida manatee conservation.
Yeah, so Crystal River, which is located on the central west coast of Florida on the Gulf of Mexico, is actually a mecca for manatees. It's the place where manatees were first really studied in the wild, but it's also the first place where it was recognized that it's an important natural sanctuary for them, because manatees are primarily a tropical species, and they, in order to survive at this northernmost extent of their range, they have to stay warm in the wintertime. And so they come into Crystal River, which is spring fed, and these springs, the water comes from underground, and so the water comes out of the ground, it stays about anywhere from 23 to 22 degrees. And when the Gulf of Mexico temperature in the wintertime begins to drop, the springs stay warm, stays the same temperature. So they flock in here, they aggregate in order to be able to stay warm and survive during the winter. So we will have hundreds of manatees coming in to Crystal River as a place, where they can stay safe and warm during the wintertime.
Cool. And can you tell us a little bit of when and why you started to interested in manatee conservation?
Yeah, so I became interested a long time ago, over 50 years ago.
50 years ago, wow.
Because I was a young kid. I grew up here in Crystal River, and I loved snorkeling and being on the water. And one time there was this fellow out on the water, and he didn't really seem like he belonged out there. He was sort of out of place. He wasn't fishing or anything, had binoculars. So out of curiosity, I went up and struck up a conversation with him. As it turns out, he was a PhD candidate from Cornell University, and the very first person to really study manatees in depth. So we struck up a friendship, and he was able to answer all my many questions as a young teenager, and we stayed in contact for all these years until he just recently passed away.
So all this conservation work has been last for like 50 years, and you also mentioned to me earlier that even outside of this spring, the Crystal River used to be as clear as the spring, and now I can see that the visibility is much worse than you described. So would you like to introduce a little bit of those the challenges of the Florida manatee facing during the year regarding their conservation?
Yeah, so Crystal River was truly crystal back in the day. and now really only crystal clear water remains is in these areas around the springs where the water flows. So we recognized fairly early on, because we could see boat propeller scars on manatees, that boats were a threat to the manatees, both from serious injury but also deaths. And so at that time, we began, and the state and the federal government began imposing speed limits on boats so that manatees could get out of the way and people driving the boats could see the manatees to avoid them. But now what we're seeing is habitat changes in large and significant ways, particularly over on the east coast of Florida, where manatees are also found. There's been increased nutrient flow into the Indian River Lagoon. That nutrient flow is feeding algal growth, algal blooms. And those algal blooms reduce the clarity of the water. And with the reduction of the clarity in the water, the seagrass, manatees are vegetarians, they eat seagrass, has been dying, over the past decade. And so when manatees are coming to that area to try to stay warm at a couple of artificial sources of warm water, they're getting there and they're going, where's the food? It was here last year, but it's not here today. So they've actually been starving and in need of rescue, and in some cases even dying, or the mothers of calves have been dying, and so we've had to rescue those calves. So what's happening now is becoming a bigger, broader environmental issue and concern for the future survival of the species.
Okay. And what do you think that we can do now and in the future to better conserve the manatees?
Yeah, so we still need to try and protect them from collision with boats. That's a given, because that's not changing. So it's become a much larger and broader environmental issue that is impacting manatees. And so with that complexity also means there has to be bigger solutions. Now, there are things that we're going to have to face, like climate change that warms the temperature of the water, but there are things that people can do as well. For example, try to move away from having individual septic systems. Don't fertilize your lawn during the rainy season. To use fertilizers, very sparingly, because what happens is when it rains, guess where it all goes? It goes into the lagoon. That's fertilizing the lagoon, which fertilizes the algae, which then starts this whole cycle of the dieback of seagrass.
And I know that you have also done a lot of work globally, like in Africa and also like in Cuba. And how do you see this kind of work important? Like, how is the situation of the manatee or dugongs globally, and the capacity building work that you have been doing? What kind of perspective that you are going into?
Yeah, so working in other countries. When I first began, traveling and working in Africa and Cuba and Belize and places like that, there wasn't a whole lot of interest in many respects. People knew that there were manatees there, but it wasn't until you sort of go out and start doing the research and studying and interviewing fishermen and working with fishermen and even manatee hunters that we have learned a lot more about what's going on in those countries. And manatees still continue to be hunted for meat in almost every place that they find. But with that work, with that research, you're almost planting seeds of individuals who then become interested, or maybe even the government becomes interested. And so what we've seen over these past 50 years since I've been doing this is there's been more and more growth of scientists and conservationists in those countries. And so it's a starting point.
Okay, so they are still at the starting point. But for Florida manatee, it's been like over 50 years of efforts, right? So, and the situation in different countries are different. Do you think we still have time in other countries to catch up?
So in these other countries, it's a good thing and a bad thing, because manatees are faced by many different threats here. it's not just hunting anymore. Though they were first protected because of hunting in the 1800s, now it's about development, it's about water quality, it's about boats. Where in many of the countries where manatees are found, the complexities are not there. So they're sort of at a stage where it's really trying to do something about cutting hunting, stopping hunting in these areas. In Belize, boats are becoming more of a problem. But it's also about training up this next generation of biologists and conservationists who are paying attention to these issues so that they can be addressed.
And also, like, I come from China, and in China, our dugong already go extinct, and also, like, our seagrasses has been not like completely gone, but it's like only some patches remain, which is not enough, definitely not enough to either sustain the population or reintroduce some individuals. I think if we don't restore the seagrass community, we're not able to do any reintroduction or conservation.
Yeah, so that's a very unfortunate situation in China, where the seagrass, their food, their habitat has been disappearing. And again, it's like this same complex issue that we're facing on the east coast of Florida, and we don't want to see the manatees go the same direction as the dugongs in China. But to improve that water quality is very, very necessary to create the right conditions for the restoration of the seagrass. And it's a challenge.
Yeah, it is. And hopefully we can have the seagrass back.
And I believe that if the seagrass returns and the habitat improves, that the dugongs will come back.
The dugong will come back.
I certainly do. And I know that's the case here in Florida.
Yeah. Thank you very much for today's sharing, and it's a nice day, and really love to enjoy the manatee today, and we will continue, and hopefully we can finish this story.